Our next speaker is an independent iOS developer who is the founder of Razeware. He's very passionate about making apps and also teaching others how to make apps and techniques for making apps. Ray Wenderlich.
So what's up, everybody? Most of the talk so far at this conference have been about apps. We're going to move on to something completely different and go on to games. And today we're going to talk about how to take an okay game with some core gameplay and add something called juice to the game to make it into a great game. So this is the game we're going to start with. This comes from a tutorial on my website made by Toby Stevens, and it shows you how to make a game like Doodle Jump. And I've just added some new art for this made by my wife, and I'm going to play this video, and you'll see that it's got the core gameplay, but there's not much to it other than the core gameplay. Let's take a look. In this game, you're a space marine. The story is you are inside a spaceship that you set a bomb off, and you're trying to escape the spaceship before the whole thing explodes. Okay, so very basic. So here's what it's going to look like after this talk. So it looks more like a game you might actually want to play. And it's all done with simple techniques that you can do very easily in your games just by paying attention to detail here and there. Done by Juice. And the whole idea behind Juice and why it's important is this feedback loop between your game and the player. So your player is playing your game and they're doing something. In this particular game, you control the Marine by tilting your iPhone left and right. So when you tilt that phone, if your game can provide feedback to the player that, hey, you're tilting a lot or you're tilting a little, that lets the player know that, hey, they've done something. If your game can provide the feedback to the player when the Space Marine hits the platform, they can easily say, hey, I hit the platform, I did something right. And that feedback goes back into their brain. They see the game responding to their actions, and then they can, based on that feedback, make their next decision. Oh, okay, I hit the platform, now I want to tilt to the left to get over to this side, and so on. And it gives the player this feeling that your game is responding to them, and it just gives this satisfying feedback loop, and it makes people feel like the game is really engaging. It's just small little details that makes the player want to keep playing. So here's what we'll be doing today. First of all, we're not really going to have any code here because the code behind this is the simple part. Most of these special effects you'll see are just a few lines of code each. What I'm going to try to get across is that this stuff is easy. This is something you can add into your games with just a few lines of code. All you got to do is take the time to pay attention to this stuff and leave some time in your development schedule to put this stuff in. So we're going to start out with the high-level way of how to think about Juice and how to decide where the right spot to put Juice is into your game through 3 simple steps. Then we're going to go through 20 different special effects that you can add into your game. Now, these aren't the only 20 ways to add Juice. There's tons, but these are 20 particularly useful ones that we put into this game. And then there's a lot more that you can learn about this, so we'll end up with some references. So let's start out with the first step to add Juice into your game. It's listing out all the actors that you have in your game. So in this game, we have our Space Marine. We have the platform that he jumps on. There's another type of platform that breaks when you hit it. There's also some power-ups that when you hit, they boost you into the air. And there's the wall itself. But there's more actors than just this. There's also the lava at the bottom of the screen. There's different UI elements you might interact with to start playing the game or restarting the game. And most importantly, there's the player itself. Arguably the most important actor of all, and how the player's interactions with your game affect the game itself. Once you have the actors listed out, you can start listing the interactions of the different actors that might react within each other inside your game. So here's 3 examples. So you have your player, which hits a platform. When that happens, you want the player to bounce off. Then you have the player hitting a power-up. You want him to boost up into the air when that happens. And then when he hits the lava, well, he's going to lose a life. And there's even more interactions than that. The player, what happens when they tap the button? You want something to happen. You want the UI to go away, the game to start in an interesting way. And when you just tilt the screen, that's interacting with the game, the player interacting with the Space Marine. So once you figure out the actors and the way they interact, then the secret to Juice is then just add as many special effects as possible to those interactions to provide that player with lots of feedback that something interesting has happened here. So here's just one example. I'm going to play this video over on the right of what happens when the Space Marine hits the platform. We're going to play 5 special effects, as you see listed here, all together. And this is in slow motion, so you can kind of see it happening. So we got a lot of different special effects going on. We got a sound effect, puff of smoke comes out, platform bounces, the player squashes and stretches a little bit. A lot of these things the player won't even notice consciously, but added together, it gives them a lot of cues that something interesting has happened. All right, so that's kind of the high-level point of view of how to think about where to add Juice, but let's see the different special effects you can add to make this happen. And to do this, we're going to actually back up a little bit. I've taken the same game that I showed you, the pre-Juice game earlier, and I've just replaced the art with colored boxes. The reason I'm doing this is because it lets us focus a little more on the special effects without getting too distracted by the art. This is actually a great way to prototype your games because you can get a feel of is the core gameplay itself fun before you start getting distracted with artwork and things like that. So let me play this. Here's the game, just the raw box version. Okay, so the first special effect is bouncing. So when you hit the platform, rather than just having the player bounce right off, we're going to make it seem like the player is interacting with the platform. So the gravity of the player hitting it makes the platform go down a little bit and then back up. So that could be just 2 move actions if you were using Sprite Kit, for example. Similarly, you can do scale effects to show something bouncing off each other. So when the player hits the wall over on the right, you see I'm just scaling up the wall a little bit and scaling it back down. Another special effect is scaling and fading. So when you remove something from your game, you don't want to just make it instantly disappear. That's jarring. It's better if it fades out in some way. So you can either just scale it out to 0, or you can make it fade, the alpha fade to 0, or you can combine the two at the same time. So you can see here that when you hit the breakable platform, it scales and fades, and when you hit the coins, they just scale out. Another special effect is squashing and stretching. This is one of Disney, has this famous principles of animations, and this is one of these. When something interacts with something else, you briefly compress, you sort of squash down, and then after you release, you actually stretch up higher. And it gives this cartoony type effect, which is nice for this particular game, which is going for a cartoony feel, and it makes it feel a little bit more dynamic that way. Next is timing functions. This is really important when it comes to adding Juice to your games. So a lot of animation frameworks in iOS, such as Sprite Kit, just come with a few timing functions by default. And the default one usually is linear, which means that you have a beginning point and an ending point of your animation, and it's just going to linearly move from the beginning to end over time. Well, that does not look good, because nothing like that actually happens in real life. Everything in real life actually takes some time to accelerate and maybe decelerate toward the end. So Sprite Kit has these other timing functions you can use called ease in to accelerate in, ease out to slow down when you get to the end, and ease in, ease out, which is the combination between the two. So if you do anything else, if you take anything from this talk, I would recommend always changing your timing function to what's more appropriate to what you're trying to do for your games. This is really subtle. It's a really hard thing to even notice, but you do notice subconsciously when you set a better timing function. So let's take a look. I have a video here where on the left-hand side we have the linear timing, and on the right-hand side we have ease out going down and ease in going up. And you'll see the platform seems to hang a little bit toward the bottom and then release, and it looks a little bit more natural than the linear way, which doesn't quite look right. But those default timing functions are really just the beginning when it comes to timing functions. There's tons of these things for different types of effects you want to use. And this is a diagram from a popular tweening library for Flash. And we wrote a book, and there's a guy on my team who actually re-implemented all of these timing functions for SpriteKit, so we could use them in iOS as well. And I'm going to pull up one just so you can see why this might be useful. Here's the timing function for ease in back. So you have your beginning state and you have your ending state. So ease in back is interesting because you don't start directly going to your ending state. You actually go away from your ending state before you go to it. So for example, say you're scaling something from big to small. Instead of going, bigger, 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 smaller, 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 you go big, even bigger before you go smaller. It's kind of like a reverse effect. So to see what that looks like, I've put that on the coin. Instead of scaling out, it actually gets a little bit bigger before it fades out. It gives you kind of anticipation as the principle of animation that Disney talks about, that something's happening, something's right about to happen that's interesting. There's all kinds of other timing functions. There's elastic timing functions, bouncing timing functions, and playing around with these can make your game look really interesting. So I definitely recommend you look into this. Next is tinting. Tinting is useful to just color your sprites a different color. For this particular game, you're in a spaceship and you're trying to escape before it explodes, so I thought it would be cool to have like a red alert effect going on with the background. Other times tinting might be useful. We have a game that we worked on called Zombie Conga. And so you're a zombie, you're running around like, it's weird, you're getting cats and turning those into zombies too, but we tint the cats green to indicate they're now zombies. You can also take enemy sprites, decompose them into parts, tint each color differently, and now you have one piece of artwork that now looks like an army of different colored figures. So tinting can be useful. Flashing, this is so simple, but it really helps the player see that something is going on. The whole idea behind flashing is when something interesting happens, color it white for a brief moment. And it'll just show the player that, yeah, that's the platform you hit, or that's the coin you just collected. It draws their attention to it. Camera. I love camera. So the version of the game over on the left, it just sort of fixes the player to a certain position on the screen. A lot of times that's what you start out with when you're making a game because that's really simple to implement. But if you just change that slightly to make the camera have a delay where you have a target and it doesn't immediately go there, but it kind of interpolates there over time, it will make it look like the player's moving so fast he gets ahead of the camera and the cameraman has to catch up. And it gives your game this extra sense of speed, which is great for this game because when you hit a boost, you really feel like, wow, now I'm going nice and fast. You can do all kinds of crazy things with camera. You've probably seen Tiny Wings. When you go really high in the air, the camera zooms out to show you, whoa, you're going really high and things like that. So definitely think about what you can do with the camera to accomplish the effects you're looking for in your games. Then there's something called permanence, which is the player likes to feel like their actions in your game have more of a permanent effect on the world. So I thought it would be interesting in this game when you hit a wall to leave a crack in the wall. And of course, since we're working with just colored boxes right now, I just colored the wall a different color. And in your games, you can do all kinds of things with this. Maybe you have a shooting game, and there's shells coming out of your gun landing all over the floor, or there's bullet holes in the wall, or dead bodies lying all over the ground. Of course, for performance reasons, you've got to get rid of them eventually, but having them around for a while at least to show the player, they're making a difference can be a great thing. So, like I said, none of this stuff is rocket science, but putting it together, our game is looking a little bit better. Same as before, just put art on it and sounds. But there's more, a lot more we can do. Okay, whenever you have background in your game, definitely recommend use some parallax scrolling. It'll give some more depth to what's going on. So here you can see there's 3 layers in our game. There's the far background, which is scrolling really slowly, and then there's the middle background, which is scrolling sort of middle speed, and then the foreground, which is scrolling the normal speed. And together it makes you feel like there's some depth to this, and it looks real nice. There's also animation. So what this one's done is we've added animation for the character as he's jumping up and down. And there's also some animations for the coin spinning. So one thing you do with animations is give clues to the player of what they're doing. So we actually play different animations. If you're tilting a lot to the left, we switch the animation of the Marine to be facing left. If you're tilting a lot to the right, he starts looking to the right. And if you're kind of in the middle, he looks straight up. So just to give another indicator to the player of how they're affecting the player's speed other than just its velocity. Screen pause is really cool. It's another simple thing that can make a nice difference. The idea behind screen pause is you can see here when he hits the lava, just for a brief second, everything freezes. All the action in the game freezes. And the reason why this is good and important is because it draws the player's attention that something interesting has just happened. It gives them a second to catch their breath. It's especially good for this because something bad just happened. They hit the lava and they need to realize that so they can adapt and not do that again in the future if they can avoid it. You also see this in a lot of fighting games when there's like a finishing move. Somebody hits somebody really hard, well, it freezes just to be like, whoa, that was a dramatic hit before it keeps going. You'll also see this in Mario, like when you hit something and you go from a big Mario to a small Mario, it'll freeze the screen for a second to let you see that that's going on. Screen shake. This is probably the elephant in the room when it comes to juice. Screen shake can really make your game have a nice juicy feel to it. So you can see here, I'm doing some screen shake whenever something happens that either affects the world itself or something dramatic that I want to pull out. So when he hits a destructible platform, the screen shakes. When he hits a coin boost, the screen shakes. And of course, when he hits the lava, the screen shakes. So it really makes a kind of a frantic feel to your game. And this can be good or bad. You can overuse this. The problem with screen shake is it actually makes your game a little bit harder because now, as a player, you're not quite sure exactly where your Marine is because the screen is shaking around. So this particular game, I think, was a good thing because I want that frantic feel. I want you to not know exactly what's going on because the whole spaceship is exploding and the game's kind of easy anyway, so it makes it a little bit more interesting. Screen zoom is kind of like screen shake on steroids. So instead of shaking, you make the thing zoom in and out. And this you want to really be limited on more than screen shaking because it's really distracting. But it's good for really important or bad things that happen, I think. And right here, when the player hits the lava, we add a little screen zoom to really show, wow, something bad just happened right here. And the most dramatic one of all is the color glitch. And the idea behind color glitch is it's kind of like old arcade machines who've gone crazy and the screen's flashing all these different colors. Or like, you imagine in the movies something hits you on the head and you see stars and everything starts flashing. So all we do here is we take the background for briefly, really quickly, flash it a couple different random colors. And it gives the player the idea, again, it catches their attention that something really bad has happened. The only time we use it in this game is when you hit your last life and you're dead for good. We add this just for a little extra dramatic flair. So up to this point, there was no opening to the game. You just started straight in the gameplay. But as with most things, you want to introduce the player to what's going on gradually. So it's better to have some kind of opening sequence that leads the player from a restful state into an action state. So what we have here is there's a main menu, and this kind of doubles as a sort of built-in tutorial because as you're just looking at the main menu, you're holding your phone and you notice that the Marine is kind of moving back and forth as your hand just happens to be tilting back and forth. So you say, oh, okay, I see, moving the phone is moving this character back and forth. And then when you tap, he sets off the bomb, and that transitions from the menu system into the core gameplay and also makes sense of why you're jumping through this weird alien spaceship. You'll see this also in the game Jetpack Joyride. If any of you guys have played that, you start out kind of in a peaceful, restful main menu, and all of a sudden the dude busts through the walls and starts running through. I think that's another good example of this. Everything that we discussed with Juice so far can be applied to the user interface in your game as well. So you don't want to just, when the user taps play, have the main menu just disappear. You want to make everything zoom in, fade out, some way so the player can see that it's just going away. Similarly, when the game over thing appears, you want that to move in an interesting way as well. And this is one of the easiest but also most it makes a huge difference. Things with animation, you don't want to run everything at once. You want to just, which is the easy thing, by the way, because when you're coding it, you just run all the actions at once. But just adding a little delay between each one can make a big difference in how it looks. So in the main menu here, we make everything zoom out from the bottom up, and the other way around, we go top down, and it looks a lot better visually, having some delays between things. You can also do this. Somebody on my site, Matthias, wrote a tutorial on making a game like Candy Crush, and all these little candies pop in. He could have made them all come in at once, but by putting random delays between each candy, it looks a lot nicer. Next, this is particle systems. This can make a huge difference and is a lot of fun to add into your games. Particle systems, if you haven't played around with it, is just tons of small sprites that you make fly out like crazy. So we have a particle system for the player itself, showing it's a trail behind the player that helps you see where he's been and the direction he's moving. We also have particle systems when the player hits a platform, some smoke comes out. We have some particle systems when you, what else do we have here? I forgot what other ones are in there. Oh yeah, when you hit the coins, all these stars fly out, like tons of different special effects. These are really easy to add if you're using a game framework like SpriteKit, and they can really add some nice polish to it. And the last one we'll discuss is physics. So this particular game, it doesn't really use built-in SpriteKit physics. I just have my own little built-in engine there that just sets the player's velocity and acceleration over time and things like that. But even so, it's still useful to add a little extra physics into the game to add a little extra visual flair. So you notice when I hit the wall or a breakable platform, all these little sort of dirt particles fall out, and it uses the physics library that comes with SpriteKit to make everything fall and bounce down in a cool way. And you can see this in the game Spelunky. When you hit enemies, different collectibles will come and bounce off things, and also they have dirt effects that are like this, and so on. So that's 20 effects, special effects you can add for your games, but I had to leave you one more, and it's gratuitous explosions. That always can make a game feel really cool. So this is a game about exploding spaceships, so we had to put tons of explosions in there. When the bomb first goes off, of course, we have random explosions going on in the background as things are blowing up, and in the end, we just blow up the entire screen and make everything disappear to kind of end with a dramatic finish. So putting it together, this is the video from before, but hopefully now you can pay attention to try to pick out the juice, the 20 effects that we've added into the game. So there you go. And this is all easy to do, just pay attention. So there's a lot more juice you can add. Like I said, these are just 20 effects. Really, the sky's the limit for what you come up with. It's just think about your interactions and what you can do to that stuff to make it noticeable to the player. So I have some great references for you guys. This is the original video that inspired this talk. These guys wrote this great video called Juice It or Lose It. And they take a breakout game, a simple game like that, and they add a whole lot of juice elements to make it look really fun. And they do a lot of stuff in particular with timing functions. If you're interested in taking a look at some extra stuff you can do with timing functions. So that's a fun video to watch. And they also have a demo of this game you can play online, and you can actually turn on and off all the different juice elements to see the difference it's making as you do that. Another great talk is this one, 30 Talks to Make Your Action Game Feel Better. If you're making a platformer shooting type game, this is particularly good. He has some really neat things he points out in there. He starts out where it takes about 3 or 4 hits to kill an enemy, and then instead of doing that, he adds in a whole bunch of more enemies, but makes it only 1 hit to kill an enemy. And that feels actually cooler, because now you feel more powerful because you're blowing up tons of enemies. Even though it's the same difficulty level, you feel better about it. And there's tons of other stuff like that, like shooting faster and all this other crazy stuff. Matthias Hollemans from the tutorial team on my site has also written a couple chapters in our book, iOS Games by Tutorials, on adding juice to your games. And he takes a different game. It's called Pest Control. You're a little dude running around killing bugs. And he adds a lot of the special effects that we talked about today into the game to just take it from an okay game and make it a lot more polished. So I encourage all of you to add juice to your games and really take that time. When your game is done, dedicate some extra time to put the juice in, and it'll make a huge difference. And if you have any questions about any of this or ever want to contact me, you can find me on Twitter. So I think, do we have time for questions? Yes, okay, so if there are any questions?
If you do have a question, please just wait until you have the mic to ask.
Okay. All right, well, if anyone wants to talk to me, I will be actually at the volunteer table later on. So thank you very much. So it looks more like a game you might actually want to play. And it's all done with simple techniques that you can do very easily in your games just by paying attention to detail here and there. Done by Juice. And the whole idea behind Juice and why it's important is this feedback loop between your game and the player. So your player is playing your game and they're doing something. In this particular game, you control the Marine by
Our next speaker is an independent iOS developer who is the founder of Razeware.
tilting your iPhone left and right. So when you tilt that phone, if your game can provide feedback to the player that, hey, you're tilting a lot or you're tilting a little, that lets the player know that, hey, they've done something. If your game can provide the feedback to the player when the Space Marine hits the platform, they can easily say, hey, I hit the platform, I did something right. And that feedback goes back into their brain. They see the game responding to their actions, and then they can, based on that feedback, make their next decision. Oh, okay, I hit the platform, now I want to tilt to the left to get over to this side, and so on. And it gives the player this feeling that your game is responding to them, and it just gives this satisfying feedback loop, and it makes people feel like the game is really engaging. It's just small little details that makes the player want to keep playing. This made by my wife, and I'm going to play this video, and you'll see that it's got the core gameplay, but there's not much to it other than the core gameplay. Let's take a look. In this game, you're a Space Marine. The story is you are inside a spaceship that you set a bomb off, and you're trying to escape the spaceship before the whole thing explodes. Okay, so very basic. So here's what it's going to look like after this talk.
He's very passionate about making apps and also teaching others how to make apps and techniques for making apps. Ray Wenderlich.
So what's up, everybody? Most of the talks so far at this conference have been about apps. We're going to move on to something completely different and go on to games. And today we're going to talk about how to take an okay game with some core gameplay and add something called juice to the game to make it into a great game. So this is the game we're going to start with. This comes from a tutorial on my website made by Toby Stevens, and it shows you how to make a game like Doodle Jump. And I've just added some new art for